Pokemon is a beloved franchise for a lot of people, and it's good reason of why. It's got a very addictive formula. The idea of going out into the world and collecting these little creatures, these little buddies who could be your friends, and then you could train them up, change them, and help them fight alongside you is extremely addictive, but I don't think that it necessarily works at all in D&D. Putting them into D&D is not a new concept. In fact, you could see across a host of videos that people have talked about this. The main issue that I find when it comes to trying to create this in D&D is that the mechanics are just antithesis to the core of what the mechanics of D&D are. And so yes, while you probably can make it work, and I will talk about how to in a second, it's probably better to just find another system that would fit it better. However, some people just want that sort of D&D twist on top of it, and I totally understand that. And there are ways of doing it. The first one that immediately would come to anybody's mind is, of course, the Beastmaster Ranger, because the whole point of the subclass is to have this person, this little buddy, this companion, this creature that fights alongside you and continues to grow stronger over the course of the game. The problem with this is that it just doesn't scale well, and frankly, it's not a very well designed subclass in general. And there are a lot of people who have talked about that, and they have made some adjustments to it, but even so, it really doesn't fit the Pokemon vibe. Again, Pokemon's catchphrase is, and the Beastmaster has one of them all, so it's probably not going to fit so well. There are other ways, of course. You could take the Artificer Battlesmith, and then you could actually have a companion in both the Battlesmith and your Homunculus. That creates two, but it's still not getting very far. And the main thing you're going to notice is I could talk about how to summon a lot of creatures. I could constantly go on that route, but most people, when they want to play Pokemon, or they specifically want to play a Pokemon trainer in D&D, is they're looking for two core aspects. One, the ability to collect and grow your army of tiny little creatures which you want to fight to the death for you. And two, they want to be able to grow a bond with their Pokemon. One of the core aspects and the largest draw of the Pokemon games is getting attached to those creatures, and I personally would know. In fact, wait, actually, did I leave it somewhere else? Thanks, babe. Alright, great. Perfect. The first video game that I actually ever bought with my own money was the original cartridge for Fire Red and my Game Boy Advance. Now, I actually eventually would go on to have quite a few Pokemon games and would revisit others such as Gold, Yellow, and Blue, but it was one of my first game franchises. I absolutely loved it. And while yes, in later years, it's kind of become less, well, it's become more problematic and they haven't tried as hard on the games, which is really disappointing, it's still the core aspect that really gets people, this idea of having a companion and growing them. And that cartridge I just showed, that's my first game and I never deleted it. I still have my save file and my very first Charizard on it. And so when you're trying to play this type of character in D&D, you want to be able to create that bond, and that's where Beastmaster could come in, but then it's missing the other aspect, which is being able to catch more and grow your collection. And so here's what I would do. There are a few different ways of doing it, and the first one which I've heard mentioned, which I'm not really convinced that this is gonna work, but I think it's interesting, is just playing a druid and treating your wild shapes as your Pokemon. The idea is whenever you wild shape, you have now put that Pokemon into combat and you're just stepping back and giving them instructions. Now, the reason this doesn't work is because narratively it gets really funky. Imagine if the wild shape goes down, and so now obviously you're back to being the druid. So what happened? Did you just teleport to where the Pokemon was? Were you the Pokemon the whole time? And more importantly, and now you're gonna have to cast spells and kind of break the illusion of that being the type of character that you're playing in the first place. Not only this, you don't really get to grow the Pokemon or create any much of a bond with them, because as long as they're out, you're controlling them, which means you're not gonna have much chance of enjoying it. And also, the wild shapes don't really get stronger. Yes, you could choose other forms and pretend that that was the original, but I just feel like that wouldn't work as well as people would be hoping for. But it is an option. The other option is, of course, summoners, of which druid is a great option, or you could also play a wizard or pretty much any of the spellcasting classes. The problem is again, you're really missing out on the chance to build a bond with the creature, and also you're bogging down combat, because the more creatures that you summon, the more initiative turns there are, the longer it's gonna take to get to anybody else's turn, and that's just not as satisfying unless you're an extremely good player, which if you are, this could work and good on you, but a majority of players are not. So what do? How do you play this type of character and really embrace the fantasy? Truthfully, I think there's pretty much only one option, and it's a very D&D version of Pokemon, but what else did you expect? Outside of somehow convincing the DM to give you a companion, or multiple companions, you probably would just be best only taking the summoning spells. Now, I know I just mentioned summoning earlier, but what I'm specifically talking about is the spells that were added a little later on that let you specifically summon a type of creature. Summon Dragon, or Summon Aberrant Soul, or Spirit. I have to look up the name of that spell. But basically, any of those summoning spells then allow you to create a single creature. one which you can actually adapt for most of them. They usually have specific types of creatures that you can summon, meaning that you could summon a flying one, or a ground one, or one that's more based on using its claws, and this does fit. Not only this, as time goes on and you gain more spell levels, you can cast the same spell at higher levels. This means every time that you gain one of these types of spells, it now acts as one of your Pokemon. That's one of the things in your repertoire. And as you continue to go on and get more, you'll get stronger ones, but you can always continue to train the lower level ones by continuing to level them up using your spell slots. This creates a much easier way of capturing your Pokemon without screwing with things narratively. And you can ask the DM to help you work with it. The problem that I see with this, honestly, is the fact that a lot of people like to get specific sets of dice for all of their characters, and if you're constantly catching new and new spirits, you'll need a lot of sets of dice. However, that is a great way that my sponsor today can help out. Because you see, this video is sponsored by Only Crits, and aside from the fact that I love them and have personally endorsed them many times because they've been incredibly kind to my channel, they're also doing an incredible sale in the BFCM Bash right now. They're doing a sale over the course of the next few days that can give you a ton of free adventures, discounted prices, and a lot of dice. It goes from November 25th to the 28th, and they are giving out a free adventure on Friday and Saturday with no code needed, a free adventure on Sunday and Monday with no code needed. They're also giving a normal free adventure included with every purchase made, 15% off discount code off everything on the website, 75% off all adventures, dice bundles and combos ideas, and so much more cool stuff. They're giving away a ton, and most of it doesn't even need a code. I have personally endorsed Only Crits many, many times, and I'm going to continue to do so because they have been so kind to my channel. And I would really appreciate it if you go help them out, as it helps out my channel as well. Does anybody remember Subspace Emissary from Super Smash Bros. Brawl? That really cool story-based mode, which they refused to do a sequel on, and I will never forgive them for. The point is, one of the things that you did in that game was you played as the Pokemon trainer who was hunting down these other Pokemon, and that was part of the core game. As they went along and they had to make different battles, his goal was always to get to the next Pokemon. At first he only had a Squirtle, and he would go on until he finally got his Charizard. And I think it is a fun way of doing that. The DM could actually use these spells, these creatures that you're capturing using spell slots, as some sort of inventive way of keeping the story moving forward and using them as plot hooks. Every time that you hunt down one of these creatures, your team has to fight them, but then you then have the spell that can create them again, and that could be a lot of fun. It could give a little bit of incentive for everybody else to help you along with your quest, because you get a really cool new spell that's really strong out of it, and they get to fight a monster and probably get XP or loot or something of the sort. You can even create a subclass around this with a little bit of homebrew, basically making a wizard that's based around the idea of being able to capture creatures in spell slots, and then later on use them. Much similar to the Skyrim games, where sometimes you could trap somebody's soul and they would forever be conjurable by you at that point. The point is, actually having a character who's based around having a lot of creatures that they can summon, create, and throw into battle is difficult, and D&D isn't built for it. And so honestly, if you want to play that type of character, you really need to lean into the D&D side of it to make it work. And that's why I suggest using these spell slots and these certain spells in order to make it happen. And eventually you can even use your 9th level spells to create for some of these creatures. You could probably use Wish to summon one of them at an extremely powerful form, maybe a Mega Evolution. Actually, that does sound pretty cool and would be a lot of fun. But there is the roleplay portion of it, and that is the one that I would find the most difficult because, again, like I keep nailing down, one of the core aspects of Pokemon and Pokemon trainers is the bond they create with these creatures, and that's just not going to be easy with this type of ability because the creatures only exist when you're summoning them. Now, we could narratively say that they're just kind of floating around you and you use your spell slots to give them enough corporeal form to fight, and that works, but I still think it doesn't allow that connection. So honestly, I think the most important thing to do is outside of combat, make sure that the DM can use these creatures as NPCs. That's the easiest way to create bonds with them and to help everybody else at the table create bonds as well. If you have this cute little dragon that's flying around and constantly messing with everybody, I think everybody will enjoy that a lot more than it's just the random spirit you happen to summon in battle occasionally and you seem to care about, but nobody else does.
Jester, can I play with Sprinkle for a little bit?
I'm sure Sprinkle would love that. Don't bite her, okay?
Thank you. I'm gonna take him and try to give him a little bath and fluff him up in the hot tub.
Okay. Now, to be specific here, based on recent adventures and the return from where you were, it very much looks like one of those viral videos of them like cleaning animals after an oil spill. Sprinkle is just like.
I'm sitting in the corner of the hot tub with my plate of sandwiches.
It also creates an interesting dynamic when it comes to combat, because once you've summoned these creatures and they're taking damage, that's your friend who's getting beat up. And so now you also have the roleplay aspect of you probably do not want your creature to get hurt too much. and that's something you take into account. Yes, they might have a lot of hit points, but you, as a character, don't want them to get hurt. It creates a different sort of combat scenario for you than everybody else, because you really want to protect them, and you have to figure that out. And at certain points, you wonder if maybe you should swap out which spell you're using and summon another Pokemon. Ultimately, playing a Pokemon trainer in D&D requires you to lean a little bit into the D&D mechanics, but the actual core storytelling portion of it, you can do. And I think it's a very fun idea. You just have to work with your DM and remain very flexible about it.
A huge thank you to the YouTube members without which this video wouldn't have been possible. A special thank you to Corey Wood, Big D the Cool Guy, Ace Pizza Guy 22, Stormsaw, Emily Mayers, and Agile Monk for subscribing at the Roll Slayer tier.